we will multi-stream across a number of different locations: Facebook, Periscope, and YouTube. YouTube is always a little bit slow to get started on the live streams, but it's looking like we are there. We're ready now. Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Watching the Watchers Live. I think this is episode 35, which we're very excited about. We decided to increase the pace of our production a little bit, and so every day for the foreseeable future, we're doing a live stream now at 4 p.m. Arizona time, which is 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 4 p.m. Pacific Time. So if you're not already aware of that and you want to be a part of the conversation, go ahead and hit the subscribe button, because we're covering all of the legal news that is most relevant today. Now, if you're not familiar with the nature of the program, the show is called Watching the Watchers Live. What we do is we monitor misconduct as it exists in our criminal justice system. We're talking about police, prosecutors, politicians, judges, prison guards, police aides, anybody who is causing misconduct or committing some sort of malfeasance in our criminal justice system. We want to hold them accountable. We want to make sure that they are being held to the same standards that you or I would be held to. And in 2020, this is more apropos than it ever has been, at least in my lifetime. We are seeing some major issues across the board, and we're going to talk about some of them. If you are a regular of the channel, you've known that we've been covering the Breonna Taylor case for some time. We have new body camera footage that was released by Vice.com over the weekend. Went through some of that in conjunction with some of the other clips that we've discussed on this program. We've got clips from Daniel Cameron, who is the Attorney General in Kentucky, and we've got a lot that we want to dissect there, because they told us that there weren't any body cameras, but now we're looking at a bunch of them. So what the heck happened there? What are we doing with that? Let's dissect that a little bit further. And then we're going to talk about the NXIVM sex cult. We have not covered this one previously. This story originated in 2018 and 2019, before we started the Watching the Watchers segment on our channel. Back then we were just producing, kind of general legal content. And so we didn't cover this story, but I have been following it along, and it's about to come to a conclusion. So one of the head sort of leaders of this group is going to be sentenced on Wednesday. So after about 2 years of going through the legal process, her part of this case is coming to a close. She was a big, very wealthy woman who had a ton of money, and she is being sentenced this Wednesday. And because of her power, because of her influence, we're going to be analyzing and sort of reviewing, is this a just sentence, or what is the judge going to be considering on Wednesday when this indeed goes forward? And then we've got some more news on a bad Popo. If you're not a regular of this channel, we talk about the bad Popo, the bad police officers who exist all throughout the United States. And why we want to cover them is so that we can shine some sunlight on their misconduct, so we can get them out of the police force, because we want good cops, we want good law enforcement, a good justice system, and that means that some of the bad people have to get thrown out. I say this all the time, but there unfortunately are a lot of bad guys out there, and they're masquerading as good guys, and they're doing it behind a gun and a badge, and that is not what we want in our justice system. So we are going to talk about a New York police officer who was just arrested on spying charges. Says that this guy has some connections to the CCP over in China, which is not good for anybody. So we're going to talk about that story and more. We've got the presidential debate coming up tomorrow. Criminal justice reform, I think, is going to be on the radar. They've released, Chris Wallace is going to be the moderator tomorrow, and he has announced a list of topics. And on there, we're going to be talking about race. We're going to be talking about justice, and probably, President Trump's going to talk about the First Step Act. Joe Biden may talk about, literature or bills that he passed years ago in the Senate, the crime bill, or in the Clinton years. And so these are two individuals who can hash out some of these things, and we're going to follow along. Not going to talk a whole lot about that because it's a little political, but we are going to start with Breonna Taylor. So Breonna Taylor, last week, we've been covering this case in depth for a long time. Let's do a quick refresh. Last week, we learned that only one officer was actually indicted as a result of the investigation. This case happened way back in March, if I'm not mistaken. We've been talking about it for a long time. Fast forward to September, and the Attorney General for Kentucky actually came out and indicted one officer, but not for killing Breonna Taylor. It was for wantonly and recklessly firing his weapon in multiple directions, which went into neighbors' apartments. These are the three officers that we're talking about. We've got Brett Hankinson was the only guy who was charged with the crime. Jonathan Mattingly was the first through the door, and Miles Cosgrove was another officer. One of his bullets is the one that actually killed Breonna Taylor. And so only Brett Hankinson was actually indicted. The other two, no charges at all. And when we were going through sort of, a lot of the information that was discussed at the press conference last week, we heard from David Cameron, who said that there was no body camera footage as essentially that we needed to concern ourselves with. And so we're going to play the clip of him talking about there not being any body camera footage. And I want you to listen very closely, because here's what he says. He says, well, let's listen to it first, and then we'll dissect it a little bit further, because this is what lawyers do. They're very good about sort of connecting words and sort of manipulating how they say things. And I think there's a little bit of that going on here. By the way, if you're not familiar with me personally, I am a criminal defense lawyer. My team and I, we help thousands of people, and we have a lot of experience in this stuff. So we deal with prosecutors on a regular basis. And this was a highly, political moment. I do think that Daniel Cameron probably has a pretty bright future in politics, very articulate, very commanding of the room, very good presence. And, it's somebody who I think has a long way to go. So this was a big moment for him. When he was out there giving this press conference, he needed to make sure that he was, crafting it the right way, because he's probably got bigger ambitions down the road. So let's take a quick look and see what he had to say. This was about the body camera footage. So let's listen to his statement. This is from last week.
There was no video or body camera footage of the officer's attempted execution of a search warrant at Ms. Taylor's residence. Video footage begins at the point that area patrol officers arrive at the location. Therefore, the sequence of events from March 13th had to be pieced together through ballistics evidence, 911 calls, police radio traffic, and interviews. We utilized information from the Kentucky State Police.
All right, so he says, so we're going to listen to it one more time, but it sounds like what he's saying is that there was no body camera footage from the officers who went into Breonna Taylor's house. And I think we can sort of agree with that. But from what we discussed last week, we thought there were 3 officers when really there was several more. And if none of them had body camera footage, no body cameras mounted on their chest or on their visors so that they could see what was going on, what are we doing with another individual who was also part of the crew who was supposed to be serving this warrant? Why did he have a body camera on his chest? Talking specifically about this individual here, this is another individual who worked narcotics. He was part of the raid that night, and we can see clearly here that he is strapped up. He's got body camera footage there. His name is Tony James. He was one of at least 7 officers who was present for the raid, and he was wearing a body camera on his right shoulder. The Louisville Metro Police Department said that officers who work in narcotics don't have any body camera footage or don't have any body camera devices on their person, but this individual clearly does. So what's the deal? Why did this officer come out and say, or why did Daniel Cameron come out and say that nobody had body camera footage on when this person certainly did? And it just goes on. The story actually from Vice came out said that there was significantly more than just this one person's body camera device. There were actually 45 different body cameras that were taking place around the scene. And so when we heard from Daniel Cameron, it sounded like we didn't have really anything of consequence. Like there wasn't any body camera that we needed to even concern ourselves because all of this stuff happened after the fact. That's not entirely true. We actually see footage and we can hear Detective Brett Hankinson, the one who was charged with the crime for wantonly and recklessly firing his weapon in his neighbor's apartment, in the neighbor's apartments. There's a lot of evidence of him poking around and him trying to get back into the scene. He has to be asked by another officer to get back out of the scene. So even though Daniel Cameron said that there was no body camera footage literally of the moment that they entered into Breonna Taylor's apartment and started firing bullets, there is other body camera footage that is highly relevant based on what we've seen, and we're going to clip through some of it. But why would he say that? Why would he? Let's listen to his statement one more time because it sounds pretty unequivocal, right? There was no body camera. It all started when they came upon after the fact. But let's start it over one more time.
Or body camera footage of the officer's attempted execution of a search warrant at Ms. Taylor's
Okay, so that's not entirely true, right? There was no body camera footage of the attempted execution of the warrant. If that other guy, James, the one I just showed you, the officer who did have a body camera device on his shoulder, if he had body camera footage on, physically on him, was it on or was it off? If it was on and Daniel Cameron didn't disclose it to us, that's a big problem, right? That's hiding evidence. If it was on but it was off, then why did he put it on? Did he just put it on with his vest? And it looks pretty clear to me that there was at least another officer that had body camera capabilities. So were there others? I mean, Daniel Cameron just said nobody had it on. We know from this photograph that there was one person who did have it on. So what is the real story here? The photograph or what Daniel Cameron is trying to tell us? So this is something where, every time you hear from the prosecutors and you hear this really finely crafted statement, what he's doing is he's splitting it there. He's saying there were 3 of them that maybe didn't have body cameras. Everybody came out after the scene. But what we're going to see here literally in a minute are some pretty, disturbing images, some concerning things that had the body camera footage been released earlier, if we would have seen these things earlier, maybe the grand jury would have come out a different way. Maybe the public would have seen things differently, brought some other evidence to the attention of Daniel Cameron and to the prosecutors who were part of Louisville, and they would have presented different facts to the grand jury, which would have resulted in a different indictment of these 3 officers. So you're going to see here, let's go through it because there is some footage here that I think is problematic. And I want to start with this clip here. So the LMPD, so that's the Louisville Metro Police Department, they're claiming that Hankinson fired 10 shots. And then when we pick this clip up, we're going to see that he was walking in to the apartment after the fact. Okay, she was already pronounced dead, and you're going to hear this conversation from Hankinson and another officer who is there. They're going to have this conversation about the shell casing. So Hankinson is going to be walking in. The audio is quiet, and they're kind of mumbling, so it's really hard to pick it up. But I'll try to guide you through the conversation. But let me preface this, set some context here. 3 of these officers were just involved in a shooting. Mattingly got shot, allegedly, by Kenneth Walker. They said that they did the ballistics on that and that the bullet matched his gun. And he is now sort of, he's out of the count. He's been taken away. He's going to get medical attention. The other officer, Cosgrove, we don't hear from. But then Hankinson, who was the officer who was actually indicted, he's trying to make his way into the apartment. Remember, he was outside originally. He's the one who fired his bullets into the apartment and got charged because the bullets went into the neighbors' apartments. He's outside of the apartment, and he's trying to make his way in and start kind of pushing his way in before another officer says, hey, I'd back out of here until the PIU, which is the Public Integrity Unit, gets here. And we have some copies of the policies from the Louisville Metro Police Department. Anytime an officer is involved in a use of force incident or an officer involved shooting, they get an escort. They get somebody. This is a matter of policy. This is in their handbook. They get somebody, an escort, to come help them through the scene of the crime so that they're not contaminating it. They're not, they're not messing with anything. They're not moving evidence or planting evidence or doing anything because they're in full control of the scene. And we talk about the blue shield and the thin blue line here all the time. People have concerns that cops who just shot and killed somebody are maybe going to go in there and move some things around so that they don't get in more trouble, so that they don't get indicted. Hankinson just knew that he fired 10 shots into a number of different apartments, and he is notably freaked out. So he's trying to make his way back into the apartment, and another, in violation of policy, and another officer says, hey, you got to back out of here until the PIU gets here. And they're having conversations about guns. Another officer says, did you find any other guns visible? And so it's a little bit of a awkward situation because the officer who's inside Breonna Taylor's apartment knows that this is policy. This guy's not allowed to be in here. He starts coming in a little bit and then he pushes him back out. So let's take a look at what that looks like. Again, the audio is a little bit grainy, a little bit difficult to hear just because it's a body camera. It's not a high tech setup, but try to make out what you can and then you'll see what I am talking about. Whoop. All right, there we go.
So I think it's casings right there. Sorry. Like if you're all casings and they're casings. So.
Oh, that's their gun? Right here.
Yeah, and right there.
That's theirs?
No, that's ours, it looks like. Theirs is in there.
Okay, so that's Hankinson.
I'd back out until they get PIU in here.
So, get out.
I just didn't know if there were any guns visible.
We did not see any.
Not too long ago.
So he says, any other guns visible? He says, we did not see any. So you saw Hankinson just sort of walk in. He's looking around. He's probably realizes this thing went bad real quickly. He's not able to get in there before another officer is in there who's probably also part of the raid and says, look, we got to, you just fired your weapon. We got to get you back out. Okay. Until public integrity unit gets here, you're out. Get out of here, man. You're not allowed to be here. And that's for his own good. That's because, cops, we don't want officers going in there and manipulating things, picking up shell casings or doing stuff, because that's going to impede the integrity of the election. And so the body camera apparently from Vice cuts out right there when he asks him to leave. There's another video that I don't think we have clipped, but there's a conversation where there is Hankinson walks up to another SWAT officer who shows up after the fact. So there's a lot of evidence after the fact. We agree with Daniel Cameron on that. We agree that there is body camera footage that is very relevant that happened after the fact. Why we didn't see this prior to the indictment, I don't know. Why we didn't, have an opportunity to raise some other arguments. Was any of this presented to the grand jury itself? Did they see this footage? We don't know, because Daniel Cameron is indicating that all of the grand jury transcripts, all of the information, those proceedings, which of course happened behind closed doors in secret for good reason, we're not able to see any of that. They asked him specifically, hey, what was at least the makeup of the grand jury? Were there any black people on there? Is probably what the reporter wanted to ask, but didn't ask. And Daniel Cameron said, well, we're not allowed to disclose that. It all happens in private. We're not allowed to have that conversation with you, essentially. And so we don't know what evidence the grand jury got. We don't know if they saw a nervous Brett Hankinson. We don't know if they're going to know about the fact that he showed up at the hospital later in violation of protocol, which we're going to get to here in a minute. So there were a lot of issues, but we don't know what was presented to the grand jury. So of course they didn't indict anybody. Hankinson is also involved in another video where he specifically asks whether or not the body camera was on, and then the camera goes off because they want it off so they can have a candid conversation without being recorded, right? Turn your phone off, make sure you're not recording anything. Then we can really say, hey man, I really screwed up on that. I'm going to need some help. What should I do? A candid conversation can take place after the body cameras are off. There's more body camera footage. So per Daniel Cameron's statement, it sounds like we are in a situation where everything was already over before the other people showed up. So he says, yep, we have no scene of them trying to execute the warrant. They were all responding officers. That's not really true, because we see right here in this next video that they did have body cameras on as Kenneth Walker was walking literally out of his apartment. So we're going to see this next clip. He's walking out with his hands behind his back. They've got a dark scene. They've got this guy screaming at him, who I think is Detective Hankinson. I haven't confirmed that, but that is what the story says. Screaming at him, walk back, I'm going to send this dog on you. So the warrant has not even been effectuated yet. This is still part of an active crime scene. They showed up, and it's not like the previous video that I just showed you, where things were mostly done and over, where they're poking around the apartment. This next clip, this is still in the heat of the moment. Kenneth Walker is not even in handcuffs yet. He's still backing up towards the officers. So this is still active. It's still going on. Is this body camera footage not relevant? Is this not part of the execution of the warrant? I think it 100% is, because until he's in custody with his hand behind his back, handcuffed, taken down to the police station, he's not in custody yet. So he's in custody, but Daniel Cameron already told us there was no body camera footage. We didn't need to see anything. That's not exactly true. That's not exactly accurate. Let's take a look at this next clip. You're going to see Kenneth Walker, Breonna Taylor's boyfriend, walking backwards. We're going to see this dog who wants to rip his head off, and we've got, he just had his girlfriend just shot 6 times. She's now dead. 3 cops firing bullets every which way. He's walking back. It's a traumatic scene. Let's take a look.
Walk straight back or I will send this dog on you. Walk back to my voice. Walk back or I will send this dog. Walk back to me. Keep on walking. Walk now. Walk. Walk back to me. Watch out, harder. Walk back to me now. Now. Leave your hands in the air. Get down on your knees. Watch that, man. Get down on your knees.
Don't look back. Don't look back.
Put your hands on your head.
I'm looking, guys. Cover.
All right, so the warrant just got executed right there when his hands were behind his back or on his head. They put the handcuffs on him. That's the end of the scene there. So why didn't we see that? Or why didn't Daniel Cameron show us that that body camera existed? We saw another officer that had a body camera mounted on his shoulder. We just saw active body camera footage of the final part of the arrest. Were those other officers around right after the shooting? Or, were they on the other side of the apartment? What the heck? Where? There is body camera footage. We can see it. I just showed it to you. So who should we believe, Daniel Cameron or your lying eyes? This is body camera footage that is highly relevant. There's a lot of material that we can decipher from this, but he said it didn't exist. So what other evidence doesn't exist that wasn't presented to the grand jury? Is it just this? Is it just a couple body camera clips that he didn't think were relevant to the original charge? Is there other information from other officers who were also there? 7 cops instead of the 3? So this is what we're talking about. Everybody is quick to just, take his statement and say, well, look, I've heard this from a lot of the right-wing commentators, a lot of the news people saying, well, look, it's just Daniel Cameron. I mean, all he can do is just be, a sort of an executioner of the law. And all he did was gather the facts and present it to the grand jury. The grand jury decided not to indict them. And so what can Daniel Cameron be blamed for? All he does is gather the facts and present them. But if he's missing half of the facts or 75% of the facts, what is he presenting to the grand jury? In this case, presumably, he told us that there was no body camera footage. If he told us there was no body camera footage, and then a couple days later, Vice.com goes and finds hours of it, I mean, I'm at a loss for words. Or are you supposed to take his word for it when it's very clear that there is other body camera footage? There's more evidence out there. So, the grand jury indictment, I don't know what was presented there. We're probably never going to know what was actually presented there because I think this case is mostly closed. Although I said that last week. I thought last week or 2 weeks ago when they had the settlement with Breonna Taylor's family, I had a feeling that was probably going to be the end of it. It, of course, isn't. Because we were taking the government's word for it. We trusted that there was nothing there, that there was no body camera footage, and we wanted to default and say in favor of the officers. They were fired upon, so they had a duty to fire back, and they were self-defense, and they were protecting themselves. We wanted to take their word for it, but why would we do that? Because it's half-truths all the time. This is what happens with prosecutors' offices and big government in general. It's not good. Very frustrating because we can see clearly there is body camera footage. And there's more that goes to this story. So there's an additional exchange here from the Louisville Metro Police Department Public Integrity Unit. There's an interview with Chief, who was the chief then. His name is Steve Conrad. So this is the chief of police. He tells the investigators that he saw Hankinson, which was the only officer who was ultimately indicted, not for killing Breonna Taylor, for firing his gun, saw him at the hospital after the incident, which he described as unusual. So here he says in his investigative report, Sergeant Jason Vance said that investigators observed Detective Hankinson. Now he's a detective. This is not a new officer. This is a guy who knows how to handle these things. Walking in and out of the primary scene. At 200 hours, Sergeant Wilder and I verbally requested Hankinson to remove himself from the primary scene and make contact with members of the LMPD peer support. So I'm going to show you from their manual here in the next couple slides specifically what happened, specifically what the rules are about what should happen after there is an officer-involved shooting. They state in their report that Hankinson actually violated policy, and they later learned that he deviated from the standard, and Hankinson deviated from the standard protocol when he traveled unattended to the University of Louisville Hospital, having contact with CID Command and Police Chief Steve Conrad. So this is a clip from the actual interview that took place from Louisville PD. And they say, I don't remember talking with Lieutenant Skaggs. I believe I mentioned it to Major Burbank that I was surprised he was there. They're talking about Hankinson. He said, did she say anything in regards to that? I don't remember. When you say you were surprised he was there, the answer was, it's just so contrary from what I've seen in previous officer-involved shootings. I mean, they, in my experience, is they are brought here to the Public Integrity Unit by, members of this unit. Okay, so, and I was surprised that it had occurred, right? That he was at the hospital. Yes. So they're having this conversation about about this cop Hankinson going to the hospital after the fact. Ordinarily, what happens is you have a situation where literally after there's an officer involved shooting, we go over here to the procedures for the officer involved shooting. Officers involved in the use of force actions and motor vehicles and so on. This is what's supposed to happen. Okay, this is what should have happened. The escort officer is assigned. The escort officer should be a peer support team member. The escort officer should not have been involved in the critical incident. So they bring in somebody else to come and remain with the officer throughout the entire initial investigation. So Hankinson, Cosgrove, and Mattingly all immediately should have been assigned an escort officer who would remain with the officer throughout the entire investigation. This is the procedures for the officers involved from the Louisville Metro Police Department. They have this online. You can just go and find it. It's section 8.12.4, and it says the escort officer is responsible for these things: explaining the investigative process, assisting the officer, meeting with their family and friends, transporting them to the PIU office. So transporting them. So Hankinson, after this occurred, should have been transported back to the original location. And they verify that the officer is isolated from all non-essential individuals. They transport the officer home at the conclusion of the initial investigation. This is something that they should have followed, and they didn't. It looks like they didn't follow it, as is evidenced by their own admission that Hankinson was later at the hospital. He actually went to the hospital after he was just involved in a shooting. He went over there to do who knows what. I don't know why he would have been at the hospital. Was he there to go speak with Mattingly, who got shot, who was the first officer through the door? Did they actually talk? So this officer was supposed to be isolated. Did he go back and talk to Mattingly, who was at the hospital because he just allegedly got shot by Kenneth Walker? And if they did talk, what were they talking about? Don't you think that could have been relevant? Don't you think that was important? When the police come and arrest you, if you're standing in a group of people, what do? They come into you, or if let's say they show up at the scene of a crime, or they go into a house. There's a domestic violence call. Police go in, they find the husband, they find the wife. What do immediately? They separate them. They'll take one into the other side of the house. They'll pull somebody back out and take them out front into the backyard, and they'll have a conversation with them. Why did they separate them? So they can get independent stories without any of these two people corroborating with one another. And then they write their reports separately. So they'll say, I talked to this person, I talked to this person. Then all of the cops will come back, they'll confer, and they'll come to a charging conclusion. They'll say, okay, well, I talked to the wife. She said that, I started it, I hit him. And so they say, well, I talked to the husband, and the husband said she started it and she hit me. So they go, okay, cool. Stories line up. I'm going to go take her. She's going to get charged with domestic violence assault. Okay. Almost never happens that way. Usually it's the reverse, like 99% of the time it's the reverse. But just for example purposes, this is what happens because they don't want them talking. In this case, who did Hankinson talk to at the hospital? Why was he at the hospital? Who was he speaking to? Was he talking to Mattingly? Probably. I don't think Kenneth Walker got shot. Was he at the hospital? Did he go to meet with Kenneth Walker and have a conversation with him? Probably not. So there is a lot more to this, and it stinks. It just stinks. It's not even clever, really, right? This stuff is pretty transparent, but we're just learning about it now after the family settled and after the indictment has come down. So are they going to go re-indict him? I highly, highly doubt it. And it's one of those things. This is just going to mosey on by. So we just got added a little bit of a clip here, a couple clips that I have not actually seen yet. So we're going to watch through them together. This is a clip from. There's another YouTuber here. He's got a huge channel. His name's Viva Frey. There's another guy I follow. I follow both of them. There's another individual. His name's Robert Barnes. And we have two other individuals who I'm not familiar with, but they did this multi-stream podcast, and I think we got some good clips for it. So let's see what some of these other individuals have to say. All right.
Honestly scared to now make this video because I believe there's going to be like a little backlash against me. Because I don't think anybody really knows the facts of the case. Like the facts that have been put out there have been just straight up lies. I don't like even with remember the Georgia case with the cop, and they were saying that a taser's not a deadly weapon. It's like, why do they just make up lies like that? You know, the Supreme Court, just like last year, said it was a deadly weapon, and now they're going to come and say it's not when a cop. It's like, it's insane. I'm sorry, I'm getting on my high horse and pearl.
Yeah, so I agree with that, right? We hear a lot about this. The facts kind of don't matter in a lot of these situations because the politicians and the political bodies who take up arms in these cases, they're the ones who really tell you what the facts are. They sort of sugarcoat them to serve their narrative. The Republicans come out and they say, hey man, they fired on the cops first. This was a lawful shooting. It's self-defense. We have to give them every benefit of the doubt. These are, men and women who are heroes. They would never do anything wrong. They live by the utmost integrity. We should take their word for it every step of the way. They say that about the cops, and they craft their narrative that way. We heard it from Daniel Cameron, who came out and said there was no body camera footage, or if it was, it all came upon after the scene. Not highly relevant. Didn't mention that Hankinson tried to enter the scene without his escort. Didn't mention that Hankinson went over to the hospital and had a conversation with somebody. I don't know if anybody else got shot that night. Don't think it was the neighbors, otherwise he would have been indicted for something else. Don't think it was Cosgrove, because we didn't hear about him getting a shot. So it must have been Mattingly who was the first one through the door. So was his wife pregnant in the hospital? It was a family member in the hospital, or was he there talking to Mattingly? Probably there talking to Mattingly. And so all of that stuff was left out. Those are important facts, very important facts. Nate, the lawyer, who is a lawyer, according to his YouTube title, which is pretty great, also agrees that there is nothing, there are no facts there. And it is frustrating. Now, on the flip side, to be fair, I have heard and seen a lot of the other side. I've seen a lot of people who are, anti-cop, all cops are bad, all cops should be fired, defund the police. They have their version of a narrative, which also isn't any good. We see a lot of the time that they're saying that these were 3 white cops who were out to go murder some black people that night. I don't think that was the case either. Right? I don't think that these cops were standing over Breonna Taylor's bed and just unloading bullets into her as she was lying there sleeping. I don't think that's the case either. There's probably some malfeasance. She's probably got some stuff in her background based on some of the things that I've seen, or at least was hanging with a shady character at one point in time and decided to reform her life. We can have that conversation. We can say, yes, some of these people have difficult lives. They come from difficult circumstances. We don't need to sugarcoat it and turn every single person into this glamorous war hero. That's also not accurate. So Daniel Cameron comes out on one side and is inaccurate. The other side of people saying that cops just showed up and decided to murder somebody in their bed is also not accurate. Why don't we try to stick to what actually did happen and maybe shine some transparency on this stuff? Why is this stuff not disclosed immediately? Why are these body camera footages not out immediately? Why is there not an order to release the grand jury transcript, making sure that everything is redacted and it's all done, none of the grand jurors are going to be known. They can make a special request or a special order to actually release this transcript. What is going on is really the question. And what is the public going to do about this? Can we do anything about it? I don't know. Other than, contacting Daniel Cameron. Breonna Taylor's family is pretty much quiet at this point. I haven't seen anything from them. They took their $12 million settlement. Their attorney, I think it was Ben Crump, came out and he said, well, we didn't get everything we wanted out of the indictment, but we'll fight on it another day. He's happy because he just got a huge portion of that settlement. So the family's quiet. The one officer got indicted. His case is probably just going to get thrown out down the road, or reduced down to some sort of misdemeanor. He'll keep his pension. He'll keep his job. He'll be on administrative leave for a little while. This whole thing will get blown over and nothing is going to change, unfortunately. Nothing is going to change. I could rant on and on and on about this and why, but we're going to move on to the next story before I blow a gasket. All right, so let's take a look at the chat before we move on and see what you have to say. What do you think about this Breonna Taylor story? Did you think it was over like I did? Did you think that this was something that we were going to be able to have some good closure on? I was hopeful that might be the case. Did you think it doesn't look like it will be? All right, so innocent until proven guilty. They only keep about 3 to 4 million out of 12 million. Wow. Yeah, it's about 30 to 40%. Ryan B said she wasn't innocent. She was a drug dealer. It doesn't matter. You don't, if you are a drug dealer or a non-innocent person, what happens is you go through the criminal process. They execute a warrant, they place them under arrest, nobody gets killed, nobody gets executed. There are different procedures for this. Why do the police need to go break into somebody's house at 12, 1 or 2 a.m. in the morning over a drug crime? Why do they need to do that? Can they not go serve a warrant at a regular hour when people are not going to be on high alert and have their guns ready? Should all American citizens just be ready for the police to just come into their residence when they're suspected of a drug crime and not be able to fire back? That's insane. It doesn't make any sense. I also know this was an arrest warrant. If the cops are good, why are they giving out tickets early morning instead of chasing real crimes? I also say this all the time. Yeah. The cops, they like to say that they're out there to serve and protect, which they do. But there's this little, phrase when it comes to traffic tickets. They're not out to write traffic tickets to serve and protect. They're out to write traffic tickets to tax collect. It generates a ton of revenue. We have photo radar cameras in Arizona that make $6 to $7 million a year off of just taking flashes. It's huge revenue generators for the city. So that's what we'll have to, focus on, just generating revenue for the city. All right, let's move on to the next story because there's a lot more to get to. And I want to talk about the sex cult. All right, so this is a story that happened a long time ago, about 2 years ago. The NXIVM sex cult is now getting closer to a conclusion. The background on this story, so this woman, her name is Bronfman. Her name is Clare Bronfman. And she was somebody who was involved in the NXIVM. It's called the NXIVM. It's pronounced NXIVM sex cult. And she's going to be sentenced for her crimes literally on this Wednesday. So this case has been going on for about 2 years, and she pled guilty back in April of 2019. So a long time ago, a year and a half ago. She's just about to get sentenced. So her case has been going on for about 18 months. She's going to finally be sentenced, which means she's going to go to prison or not. And so I want to talk a little bit about this story because it is curious. It is interesting now that we're coming to a conclusion. The big question is going to be, what is she going to be sentenced to? Okay, this was a woman who was a part of the NXIVM sex cult. We're going to talk a little bit more about that. Part of another group called the DOS, which really was a disturbing group. And then all sorts of, actually bringing people, trafficking human beings into the United States in order to make them sex slaves. And what is she going to get? Is she going to go to prison for a long period of time? We have a copy of her sentencing letter, which she submitted to the court, and I want to go through that a little bit. But let's talk about this actual case. So, as I said, in 2019, she actually pled guilty to 2 charges: identity theft and an immigration violation. So think about those 2 things, right? Identity theft and immigration violations. That's kind of weird, right? She was involved in a sex cult. She was trafficking people across borders. There was a pyramid scheme going on. There was all this sort of extortion taking place and, presumably, moving money around and all sorts of stuff. But she pled guilty to 2 crimes: immigration violation and identity theft. Those sound pretty minor to me. Wonder what's going on there. So prosecutors accused her of using false statements. She secured visas for young women from Mexico. They were recruited in, and then they started to work for NXIVM. She conspired with the leader of NXIVM. His name is Rainier, and they basically worked together to commit identity theft by using the credit card and the bank account of Rainier's dead girlfriend, which kept assets out of his name and then allowed him to evade income tax requirements. So there's a lot going on here. Those are all crimes. At the time, many of the victims were frustrated by the guilty plea that happened back in 2019 because they're saying that it minimized her role, and her lawyers have said they were responding essentially with the affluent defense. Do you remember this case from years ago? I forget the name of it, but there was a kid who did something terrible. I think he murdered somebody or killed some people in a car accident, and he got a slap on the wrist essentially because of the affluent defense. He's too rich. He has too much money. He doesn't know any better. Therefore, he can't be responsible to the same level that you or I could be responsible for. Okay, so the very, very rich, the ultra wealthy, they sort of live in a different justice system than you or I do. If you're worth $1 billion, you can have a lot of success when you're facing criminal charges for things like bringing people across Mexico trafficking them into the United States and then making them sex slaves. If you do that and you have a few $1 billion in a legal defense, what does that mean for you? Well, you get an immigration violation. You get an identity theft violation, whereas somebody else doing those things would certainly not get the benefit of that plea. So the victim said that she was, played a much bigger part in this thing, but for some reason, the prosecutors are offering her a pretty low-level deal. They're saying she is going to be sentenced on Wednesday, and it feels very light to me. The prosecutors are asking for 5 years in prison. Her defense team, they're asking for 0, obviously, right? The defense always asks for nothing. And that's pretty light. She could be going to prison just based on those 2 charges for up to 25 years. So the judge has the range, the opportunity to give her basically 0 time or all the way up to 25 years. And during the change of plea proceeding, he warned her to that fact. He said specifically, I don't have to follow the sentencing recommendations. I can give you 10 years on the one charge and 15 years on the other charge, and I can run those things consecutively, so I can stack them on top of one another. So you'll do the 10 first, then you'll do the 15 next. He could go that route. We don't know if he will or not, but the government is asking for 5 years. So a maximum of 25, they're asking for 5. Her defense is going to be not asking for any time. And we see that she's scheduled for Wednesday. And if you don't know who she is the heiress to the Seagram's liquor fortune. So Seagram's vodka and all that sort of low-end alcohol. Her family basically created that. Her father was a billionaire. And so she spent tons and tons of money supporting this NXIVM group. So let me show you this. So this is really sort of what the foundation was. The NXIVM group said that they were sort of an educational organization for adults and other entrepreneurs and people who wanted to make more of their lives. And they started this group called the Executive Success Programs, ESP. So this is one of the NXIVM buildings. It was based near Albany, New York. It was marketed as a workshop that would help people overcome their fears and then, sort of self-actualize. They were looking for trust fund babies. They were looking for people with low self-esteem, and then they would charge people to come and take their courses. So it kind of reminds me of some of the Scientology stuff, but they would say that these courses are $5,000. It looks like from 1998, over 18,000 people have taken the courses, which are worth thousands of dollars a piece. And so the NXIVM group was sort of the face. It was the higher level, public facing, this is our legitimate business. We're only here to help people improve their lives. But unfortunately, that wasn't the truth because there's a lot of other problems going on. And this is the other kind of shadow organization called the DOS. So you had the NXIVM at the top, which would bring a bunch of people in, and it would sort of charge them a bunch of money for these online courses or these educational courses. And if they couldn't afford it, then they would just get into debt with NXIVM. And then as a result of that debt, they would have to sort of be indebted to the organization. So they couldn't leave, and they had to stay, and they had to work, and they would take more courses and then accumulate an even bigger debt. So that's how they would capture these people, and they would stay there for a long period of time. Rainier was the head of this. So we have the woman we're talking about now, Miss Bronfman. She was sort of the funding arm. She donated tens of millions of dollars over to the NXIVM organization. And then she was really working closely with this guy named Rainier. Now, Rainier turned this second organization called the DOS, stands for Dominus Obsequious Sororium. He turned it into this literally a sex cult where he would brand women and he would make them lose weight and he would ask them to film themselves saying they did terrible things, and then he would use that as leverage. He would use that as blackmail over them to make sure that they kept coming back and they did what he wanted, and they had to respond to his text messages all the time and all sorts of stuff. And so he even branded them and with his initials. And this was all done, allegedly, according to Miss Bronfman and to Keith, with open arms. People wanted to do this. This was done voluntarily. This is what one of the actual brands looks like. So Keith, we see a K there. And then we see the A. So Keith, A, and then we see the R. The R is for his last name. So we see Keith A. Rainier. And this is one of the government's exhibits in the U.S. Attorney's Office. So he's literally taking women and branding them. And the name Obsequious Dominus, or Dominus Obsequious Sororium, stands for the translation. I'm not a Latin scholar, but I looked this up on the internet, and somebody is telling me that it is master over slave women. Dominus obsequious sororium, master over slave women. And so that was founded in 2015. He turned them into sex slaves, gave them restricted diets. They had to make a lifetime vow. They had to call him their masters. And then they would do these illegal human experiments. I don't even know what that is, but it's not good. And there's stories saying that the slaves would then have to go out and find other slaves and then bring them back in, and then they would be their masters in this like hierarchy, this pyramid of this slaves, going down and going down. So not good. This guy, this is him. This is Keith Raniere. And he was the only defendant in this case that actually went to trial. So all of the other people, you may have heard, remember this lady? This was Allison Mack. I think she was the actress in Smallville. And, she took a plea deal. Bronfman took a plea deal, but this guy did not. He was convicted in June 2019. Now, he got the more serious charges: racketeering, sex trafficking, other crimes. He said that he was sort of the literature in the NXIVM and the DOS sex cults were that he was the smartest man in the world. Not too smart, though. Mr. Raniere, he created a secret group of women, leading to NXIVM's reputation as a sex cult. He was called the Master and the Grand Master. They were undergo near starvation diets and respond to his unexpected text messages at all hours. Women who failed their duties were whipped with a leather strap. So the women were required to hand over what they call collateral that could act as blackmail: photographs, videos. They would falsely accuse their spouses in these videos of abuse so that they could, they could go back to their spouse, or Raniere or NXIVM or DOS could take that to the police and say, hey, they were getting abused, or they actually, were involved in some sort of domestic violence with their spouse. So legal claims, all sorts of stuff. Clare, the other woman who's getting sentenced on Wednesday, she joined in 2003. She had heard about it from her sister, and just like that affluenza defense, that I have too much money defense, she is going to be claiming that as well. We have a copy of her sentencing recommendation. I want to show you a little bit more about how that's going to work. She says, I was always shy. I never knew how to communicate with anybody. I had a lot of insecurity about my wealth, and so I had too much money. I didn't know how to act. I didn't know what to do with it. So then she poured more than $100 million, and she gave into NXIVM, funneling their legal battles, really providing for private investigators and funding marketing and all this stuff. $100 million, $67 million, which she gave over to this Keith Raniere guy who never repaid it. $67 million, he invested that in commodities markets. And so people are very upset because Bronfman is now, depending on what happens on Wednesday, if she gets 5 years, if she gets less than 5 years, people are a little concerned about that because they're saying that all of this misconduct, all of this horror show, this freak show of, branding people and trafficking people across state borders and all of that horrendous stuff, they're saying that this was all enabled by Bronfman. She was the one who funded this organization. So why is she getting off with a recommendation from the U.S. government for 5 years? I don't know. Good question. They said that she even targeted her own father when she was a part of this cult. She installed malware on her father's computer, giving her access to all of his email accounts for years. Her father is a billionaire. Her lawyers have argued that she should not go to prison at all because she genuinely believed that NXIVM was a force for good. She had no idea about the human trafficking or sexual abuse. But she pled guilty to some of those things anyways. Not necessarily trafficking for sex trafficking, but just an immigration violation. I don't know what the nature of that charge is, but we'll certainly know more after sentencing. She's accused of making false statements to secure visas for young women from Mexico, who she specifically recruited. She conspired to commit credit card fraud by using the bank account of Raniere's dead girlfriend. She kept assets out of names to allow him to evade tax requirements. So 5 years for all of that, to me, is very, very low. Wonder if you or I would get that same benefit. This case, as we know, became a spectacle. It actually even became an HBO series, which I have not seen yet, but I've heard is pretty good. We saw Allison Mack was also involved in this thing. She was one of the more high-profile people, but a lot of people were involved in this whole ordeal. And now that we're on the verge of sentencing, so we're just getting close to actually seeing Clare Bronfman being sentenced, what happens anytime that you go into criminal court and you're going to be sentenced for a crime, what you first do is what's called a change of plea. So when you start a criminal case, you're investigating the case. So you enter a plea of not guilty. You say, I'm not guilty. That's going to give you all the time in the world to fight the case. You know, get the discovery, get your police reports, your officer's notes, your body camera footage like we just saw, everything that the government has against you. You want to start obtaining those things. In this case, we're talking about, you know, significantly complex financial transactions, visa documents that have been filed with the U.S. government and all sorts of stuff. So she enters a plea of not guilty. Then when a deal is worked out, so for a year and a half or several years, she had her team of attorneys who were working a deal out with the prosecutor's office. So they entered into this agreement, which sounds like it may be somewhat broad. So the government is asking for 5 years. And the judge can go less than that, or the judge can go more than that. So it sounds like they're kind of they're leaving some of the sentencing components up to the discretion of the judge, which is not necessarily a bad thing. So when the judge has that ability to have a sentencing range, to sentence you to the max or to the minimum, what the defense team will do is they'll submit what's called a sentencing letter and a sentencing recommendation. So in this case, Clare Bronfman actually wrote a sentencing letter basically to try to mitigate and to try to persuade the judge to give her the least harsh deal possible. Now, do I think she actually wrote this? I certainly do not. I think her team of attorneys helped her craft this, and I can say that because I've done many of these. I've done many sentencing letters, sentencing recommendations, formal motions, advised many clients on how to write a good sentencing letter or a sentencing recommendation. And so what I'm able to see here are a couple things that I think are going to be problematic. I don't have the whole letter because it is a long letter. You can find that over at frankreport.com. Actually, here is the link to it, frankreport.com. Let me get rid of myself so you can see where to go on that. This has her whole letter there published. I think he was the original source of where this came from. But a couple things. So you would think that somebody who's going to be going through a sentencing process in federal court, who has a potential time for up to 25 years in prison, you would think maybe that they would be remorseful and they would disavow the groups that they were a part of that contributed to the illegalities that they were committing. She doesn't do that. Clare Bronfman doesn't do that. She says, many people, including most of my own family, believe I should disavow Keith and NXIVM, and that I have not is hard for them to understand or accept. However, for me, NXIVM and Keith greatly changed my life for the better. Most of my teenage years in the early 20s, I was ashamed of who I was, constantly focused on my shortcomings and ridden with self-hate, which I can understand all that, right? I think most people go through that phase when they're in their 20s and their teenage years. Most people, they go through a period like this. And she said, NXIVM changed that. I learned a sense of who I am beyond my faults and the tools of how to transform things and so on. I started to embrace myself and turn outwardly to care for others and help others. Yes, most people go through this process in their lives. Most people, however, don't have $100 million that fund a sex cult, that fund commodities investments to the tune of $67 million, that sign visas for people traveling across state government borders, across countries in order to go into a sex cult. They also don't fraudulently, you don't fraudulently set up credit cards or bank accounts so that you can hide taxes. We all know what it's like to feel a little inadequate, but not all of us know what it's like to spend $100 million on a sex cult. So that, the fact that in her sentencing memorandum, she's essentially not saying, she's saying, I'm not going to disavow NXIVM. I'm not going to disavow Keith. That's a little troubling. She even says that she's not going to disavow the DOS. So she goes on to say that the group that was branding people and forcing people into these master-servant sort of dynamics and was gathering all this blackmail evidence against them, she's not going to disavow that portion either. She says people also believe I should have disavowed DOS, but from the information I had, it did not make sense for me to do so. When I found out about DOS and with the blog, the Frank Report reporting many accusations, there were certainly things I was scared by and questions I had about it. However, I never assumed that, I never assumed bad intent. So I asked a few of my friends to help me understand it. I was never told about anything sexual or damaging of any nature, and I was assured by them and by professionals that there was no harm being done. No one was being forced to do anything. And to the contrary, people were experiencing improvements in their life through their membership in DOS. So, did she not know about the brandings? Did she not know about the transportation of people from Mexico into the United States in order to go into these things? I'm going to guess that this is another case where somebody who was highly involved in criminality is getting a sweetheart deal because of their connections, because of their power, because of their influence, and they also deserve to be held accountable. They deserve to be held to the same standards that you or I do. Just like cops should be held to the same standard, prosecutors, judges, politicians, so too do the ultra wealthy, because unfortunately they're living in a little bit of a different strata when it comes to the justice system. And I am a capitalist, by the way. I love capitalism and I think it's a great system, but that doesn't mean you get to buy your way out of our justice system. That's not okay. So, we're going to see what happens on Wednesday. We're going to see if the judge buys it or not and how the judge is going to actually end up sentencing her. I've done many sentencing hearings and sentencing recommendations, and judges typically don't like what we just saw. They want people to be remorseful. They want people to disavow themselves from the groups that they were a part of previously. Otherwise, there's a likelihood for recidivism, likelihood that this person is going to do it again or hasn't learned anything. And so if you read the full sentencing memo, you're going to see that there is a lot in there about talking about her low education. She says, I'm going to go get my GED. I'm not that smart, so I didn't know what was going on. That's put in there by her attorneys. Let's remind the judge that you're not too bright. You didn't know any better about this stuff. You didn't know you shouldn't have done that. And so that's, all these little ways that they're crafting this sentencing recommendation. They're trying to do the best they can, but they're being dealt a tough case because she is not willing to show remorse for being a part of the group. She's saying, I'm sorry they were hurt. I'm sorry that this happened to these people, but by and large, they were good organizations. NXIVM was good. DOS was good. I can't disavow either of them. So judges typically don't like that. The judge may read that and say, okay, well, this person's actually not all that sorry, and the judge can weigh the evidence, weigh the government's arguments, weigh the defense arguments, and then come to a conclusion. That will be happening on Wednesday. So we'll have an update probably on that show on Wednesday. So if you're not already subscribed, make sure that you are subscribed. And let's move on to the next story, shall we? So let's go on to bad Popo. Should we do some bad Popo right now? We do have a bad Popo. Bad police officers. So this officer is not good. New York Police Department officer was just arrested by the federal government for spying for the Chinese. This is a New York City police officer, and he is a U.S. Army Reserve member. He's been arrested on federal charges of acting as an illegal agent for the Chinese regime. His name is Baimadajie Angwang, and he's a 33-year-old naturalized U.S. citizen. He was born in China's Tibet region. He fed intelligence to the Chinese government on behalf of the ethnic Tibetans who were living in New York City. So he was charged with a few crimes: committing wire fraud, making false statements, obstructing official proceedings. He faces up to 55 years in prison if he's convicted of all the charges. Prosecutors also say he helped the Chinese consulate gain access to the New York Police Department officials. So this guy, who is a New York Police Department officer, was sort of a segue into the upper echelons of the New York Police Department. And why would they be doing that? Why would the Chinese want access to New York Police Department's upper echelon officials? Good question. Prosecutors also speculate that, he works as a civil affairs specialist in the Army Reserve. He has the rank of a staff sergeant. He was stationed at Fort Dix, New Jersey. His work involves planning, training, and executing civil military programs. He holds a secret level security clearance in connection with this role. In a phone call with an unarmed Chinese consular official whom he referred to as boss. So this guy's on the phone with the Chinese consul and he's calling him boss. He's identified himself individually as an asset. So he told him, I'm an asset. And he said, quote, even if they deny you in the end for whatever reason, but at least let them know, hey, you have someone in the police department here now. So that's according to court records. So he says, at least let the Chinese know they have somebody in the police department now. So he's basically making a full commitment to the Chinese Communist Party. He is saying he's calling, he's texting his supervisors, his handlers who are part of the Chinese government. He said that the court records said that he called and texted the boss at least 55 times between June 2018 and March 2019. And he told them all about the NYPD upcoming events. He said that they were trying to raise our country's soft power, indicating that intel could help them, the officials, advance in the ranks within the Chinese government. He operated on behalf of a foreign government, lied to get his clearance. He used his position as a police officer to aid the Chinese in subversive attempts and so on and so forth. So, this guy is not good. This is a very, very bad Popo. And there are a couple things that I wanted to highlight here. because there are some interesting connections. So let's first talk about every single oath that this guy violated, right? He violated an oath to the New York Police Department when he first got on there, right? He swore an oath to protect whatever their oath is. He also made an oath in the U.S. Army and to the U.S. And so this guy is just constantly violating his oath of his duties, of his job performance. And so when I started reading this article, I was thinking about, well, why would the Chinese government, why are they trying to infiltrate our justice system? And are they responsible for some of the unrest and for some of the unease that we see on the streets? And for a long time, I've been really focused on trying to identify what BLM wants to do. So why am I talking about the Chinese government and BLM? What does Black Lives Matter want? What do they want to do? What is their stated purpose? If you remember, if you're a regular on this channel, and if you're not, hit subscribe. But if you remember, I've been very, very interested in learning what Black Lives Matter wants to accomplish so that we could help them, right? I'm a big advocate of justice reform, but I need something to do. We need something. What do we want to do? Do we want to end qualified immunity? Do we want to terminate police unions? Do we want mandatory body cameras? Do we want greater discipline? Do we want to give them pay raises? What is the solution? What is it? And I have not been able to find a solution from Black Lives Matter or from the protesters or from Antifa. I don't know what they want, other than, to me, it seems like the stated purpose of their goal, what they're intending to do, is just to cause chaos and unrest. And when we started poking through this, we started to see some other articles. This one comes over from the Heritage Foundation. It's a senior fellow. His name is Mike Gonzalez, and he discovered that there is this organization called the Black Futures Lab, which you can see here. This is their logo. And we're going to see that there are some pretty strong connections between BLM, or the Black Futures Lab, and the Chinese Communist Party. And specifically, you'll see here, when you go over to their website, this is what it looks like. So if you want to go support Black Futures Lab, you'll see that you can do so. You can make any contribution that you want. And are you ready to join us? Well, sure you can. Just keep in mind that this is fiscally sponsored project of the Chinese Progressive Association, which is directly connected to the Chinese. And so many of the Chinese Progressive Association of San Francisco are members of this organization called Left Root, which is an organization that overlaps a lot with the Chinese Communist Party. And so there's this sort of interwoven web of the Chinese infiltrating different areas of the movement, right? They're infiltrating the New York Police Department. They're infiltrating the other side. They're infiltrating the Black Futures Lab. They set this up, or they sponsored it by the Chinese Progressive Association. So why are they playing both sides here? Why are they, influencing New York Police Department, but also influencing the Black Future Labs? What's going on here? Why are they doing that? Maybe because of their interest in causing an unrest, in causing civil discord, in funneling people to just be mad, but mad without a purpose or mad without a solution. And that's what we're trying to do on this channel, is just propose and discuss some solutions, trying to be useful, trying to be helpful, trying to improve the justice system, trying to educate and shine some sunlight on a lot of the problems that we see as practicing criminal defense attorneys. We have a whole office of people here who live every day in the justice system. We see a lot of problems with it. But how are we supposed to operate when we have foreign governments influencing the New York Police Department to do one thing, and then also influencing the Black Futures Lab and organizations that are closely connected to Black Lives Matter to do the other thing? Of course, we're going to have continuous unrest. Of course, we don't want to see it. That officer, whose name is extremely long and I have a difficult time pronouncing it, is a bad Popo, and we cover all of the bad Popos on this show. The last thing I wanted to share with you today, I just found this. I discovered this on Reddit. There's a subreddit thread called 2020 Police Brutality, and they record all of the incidents of police brutality across the country. I just thought this was a neat project, and so I wanted to share it with you on this channel. But if you go to this website, it's actually, where is it? Okay, it's called incidents.846policebrutality.com. And when you go to this website, you'll see that you can actually zoom in on all of the different police brutality incidents. And this is, of course, happening around New York City Hall. We have got some protesters in Oregon. So if you go here, if you go over to Portland, you're going to see that there's 370 incidents, 370 directly in Portland, which has been the subject of protests and unrest for the last 100 and something days. So of course they're going to have a lot there. All right, and that's it for me today. Let me see. Let's check some comments. See if we can take some comments. I know there was a lot in this live stream, a lot of content, but there's a lot going on in this world. So let's see what people have to say in the comments. Storm says Tucker's on, better content. Peace out. Good chat, guys. Later, Storms. Tucker is definitely better content, or better produced content, I would say. But I would say it's a little bit. Let me walk that back a little bit. I would say it's a little bit. Generic. It's kind of the same talking points. I love, a lot of these professionals, but it is a little bit generic. It's the same kind of talking points over and over again. All right, let's see. Divide the nation, cause internal strife, promote revolution, China conquers without invasion, age-old strategy. Yeah, it's kind of what it feels like to me. It feels that way. And I'm not real sure what our government is doing about it. I'm not sure what the politicians are doing about it, or if they even recognize it. To me, it feels like there are so many of them who are tied in, they're sort of in bed with the Chinese government, in large part because of their businesses. You see guys like Mark Cuban, who comes out and refuses to, denounce certain parts of the Chinese Communist Party. And you start to wonder, why is that? It's because they're too connected, they're too integrated financially, and it becomes difficult to denounce somebody on whom you're relying for your financial wherewithal. Graham Cracker says criminal lives don't matter, which is an unfortunate statement because they certainly do. I think that everybody deserves due process. Everybody deserves their day in court. Everybody deserves a lot of basically what we promise in the Constitution. So I think they do matter. They deserve to have their fair shake. Are you more concerned with the improper procedure in Breonna Taylor's case or reckless shooting? It's a great question. Wow, it's a great question. I mean, I think I would say that I'm concerned about both. I understand the reckless shooting as a crime and as an indictment, but the procedure is what leads to the uncovering of more malfeasance. So following proper procedure would lead, I think, to uncovering more malfeasance. So if we can highlight areas where the procedure was botched so badly, then we're probably going to see a lot more that happened as a result of that botched procedure. So if this cop, was routinely entering crime scenes without an escort, or routinely going and visiting other, people who are in the hospital, or corroborating his stories, I'm going to guess that by uncovering that problem with the procedure, we're going to see that this was a pattern, or this is a pattern within the department. They have all of these policies and procedures on the books so that they can point to them, but do they actually do them, or do they actually follow them when they're out in the field? And when our government is sort of being less than dishonest by not providing us with the full truth, that's what I really have a huge problem with. The way that our system should work is accountability should check each other. We should have, think about the balance of power that we talk about in our civics classes. We've got the executive, the judiciary, the legislative, and they all have these checks and balances on each other. We need that same type of thing here in our criminal justice system. Unfortunately, too much of that power is consolidated in the hands of a few. In this case, in Breonna Taylor's case, they're all consolidated in that one prosecutor's office or the attorney general's office. And all these agencies are working together, and they all have, very similar cultures and very similar mindsets, and they're all protecting themselves. And there's nobody to really call them out. That's what defense attorneys do. That's the entire purpose of why we exist, is to balance that equation. Unfortunately, the government has all the cards. They have unlimited funding. They have everything. All of the cops are in their pockets. All of the federal executive agencies that are responsible for law enforcement, they have billions and trillions of dollars worth of assets and infrastructure and resources that the everyday citizen like you or me, we just don't have that. Okay, even myself, my law firm, we are limited by our budget and by our office, and so we need, and we need to charge people in order to represent them. So we got to go generate our own funding. We can't just go pass a bill and just get $1 million grant from somebody. So the government holds all the cards, and so we need them to be transparent with us. We need them to show us what they're doing and how they're doing it, because we are the check on that power. We are the checks and balances. And so when the government, who is in control of all the cards, when they tell us, hey, we gave you everything. Look, this is what we've got. This is my hand. And then we find out later they were hiding some aces up in there. They had a whole second deck up there. That is what drives me nuts. I lose it because we're trusting those people. They're elected. We want them to be honest and do their jobs responsibly, and they don't do it. And that just trickles down. If the people at the top are going to be, engaged in misconduct and sort of half truths with us, that's going to trickle down throughout the entire organization, and everybody's worse off as a result. Somebody wrote, make the federal government afraid again. Yes, I would like the federal government, I would like all government to be reminded of who they work for. It's we, the people. We don't need to be afraid of the government. They need to be afraid of us. We are what make this country work. The people make this country work. The government just get in our way. They are just there imposing all sorts of regulations and ruining everything, and they reframe it brilliantly in a way to make us feel like we need them. But do we? All right, BLM and Antifa socialist movement can be explained by a 6-minute video here on YouTube. Let's see. Seeing a lawyer pass himself off as an objective when he's another right-wing hack is angering. I don't think I'm a right-wing hack. I beat up on the right pretty hard, I think, on this channel. But I understand and appreciate your perspective. Thanks for being here. Hit the subscribe button. All right, there goes Captain Jackass making claims with no evidence that have been literally shown to go in the opposite direction. Finally, Little Starfish Dude, a comment that makes sense and is backed up by proven facts. BLM is full of it. Integrity of the election. Trump haters never research. They're supposed to be protecting our liberty, but that's long gone. That comes from Eric Twog. Yeah, it's a good statement. Yeah, I mean, the federal government, they're going to continually vote themselves more power. They're going to continually, sort of limit. If they're going to be taking more power, that means we got to give it up. We got to, we're giving it up so the federal government can take care of us because we can't take care of ourselves, right? We need some people who are smarter than us, who know better than us to solve all of our problems for us. And that is not just a left versus right thing. That is just a people thing. The liberals and the Democrats, the big government proponents, they want more power. They want more control. When we're talking about the Republicans, are they really that different? I mean, we're seeing a lot of the same things from the Republicans across the board. And they want power and they want control. And that also comes at our expense. So for the people who just say, you're just a right-wing guy, I would say more of a libertarian individual, civil libertarians, civil rights, all of those things are very important to me. And when they're infringed by both parties, that's when I have issues with it. All right, everybody. Well, it's about that time. I want to thank you so much for being here. We're going to be here again tomorrow, 4 p.m. Arizona time, 7 p.m. Eastern time. It's also 4 p.m. Pacific time, so if you're on the West Coast. And we're going to have another conversation about these issues and more tomorrow. So if you're not a regular on this channel, hit the subscribe button. I appreciate everybody being here today and being so lively in the chat. I know these are interesting times and things can get heated, but like I said, I really do appreciate you being here. It's great to see so much activity and to see so many people engaging in discussion of these issues. And so I'm excited to join you and to be here and be a part of it, quite frankly. So we'll see you back here tomorrow. Again, if you are not already a subscriber, hit the subscribe button. Otherwise, have a great night and a great evening and a great everything. We'll see you tomorrow. Bye. End. My stream is not ending. I keep trying to end the stream and it's just literally not ending. So I guess that's it. Just going to turn the camera off. Bye.